Have you ever woken up at 3 a.m. with your heart racing, thinking about all the things that could go wrong tomorrow? Have you ever felt that tightness in your chest when you think about the future, as if the whole world were collapsing on top of you? If the answer is yes, then you are not alone. Anxiety has become a modern epidemic, and everyone seems to have a magic recipe to cure it. But what if I told you that a 19th century German philosopher, who died over 120 years ago, had already discovered not only the origin of modern anxiety, but also the most powerful antidote against it? Friedrich Nietzsche wasn't just a thinker. He was a man who faced his own anxiety, depression, and a series of existential crises that would make any of us collapse. Imagine a man alone, walking through the mountains of Switzerland, carrying on his back not just a backpack, but the weight of questions that have tormented humanity for millennia. This man had no antidepressants, no therapy, no social media to distract himself. All he had was his mind, his pen, and a fierce determination to understand why we suffer, and more importantly, how we can stop suffering for no reason. By the end of this video, you will not only understand why Nietzsche considered anxiety a symptom of something much bigger happening in our society. You will leave here with practical mental tools, tested by over a century of application, that will completely transform the way you see your fears and worries. If you feel it's time to stop being a hostage to this feeling and want to discover the strength that great thinkers can offer you, know that this channel is your refuge. Subscribe now and activate the notifications, because the journey we begin today is just the first step, the brutal diagnosis. Why you are anxious. Let's start with a question that gets straight to the point. Why are you anxious? And don't give me that automatic answer of, oh, it's because of work, or it's because of my problems. Nietzsche would say that's just the surface of the problem. For Nietzsche, modern anxiety isn't just a psychological symptom. It's a symptom of a much deeper crisis. He called this nihilism. But hold on, no need to run for a dictionary. Nihilism, in practical language, means that we have lost the meaning of things. We live in a society that promised us we would be happy if we followed certain rules. Study, work, buy, consume, repeat. But here's the problem. These rules aren't working anymore. You followed the modern life manual, and yet you're still anxious. Why? Because you are living by values that are not your own. You are trying to be happy by following a script written by other people. Think about it. How many of your worries are really about things that matter to you? Or are they about things you think should matter because everyone said they should? Nietzsche would say that your anxiety is, in fact, your soul screaming, hey, this life isn't mine. I didn't choose this. And you know what's most interesting? He considered this anxiety the first step toward real freedom. But if anxiety is just a symptom, what is the real disease that is killing us from the inside? The invisible disease, the resentment that corrodes you. Here's a truth that's going to hurt. Most of your anxiety doesn't come from what might happen in the future. It comes from what you didn't do in the past and what you aren't doing in the present. Nietzsche identified something he called resentment. And no, it's not just being upset with someone. Resentment for him is when you start blaming everything and everyone for what isn't working in your life. It's when you become a hostage to circumstances, to others, to luck, to the system. I'll give you a practical example. You're anxious because your boss might fire you. But the truth is, you've hated your job for years and never did anything about it. You're anxious because your account is in the red, but you never had the courage to make tough decisions about your spending. You're anxious because your relationship is lukewarm, but you never faced the difficult conversations you needed to have. Resentment is when you transfer the responsibility for your life to external factors, and then you get anxious because you have no control over those factors. It's a vicious cycle. The less control you take of your life, the more anxious you become. The more anxious you become, the less control you take. Nietzsche would say you are suffering from slave morality. You've gotten used to reacting to life instead of creating it. And that is the root of all modern anxiety. But how do you get out of this cycle? How do you transform this anxious energy into something powerful? The alchemy of transformation. Amor Fati. Let's move on to one of Nietzsche's most revolutionary ideas, which can literally transform your relationship with anxiety. Amor Fati. This means love of one's fate, or translating to our language, loving everything that happens to you. Before you think this guy is crazy, let me explain what this really means in practice. You are anxious because you are at war with reality. You want things to be different than they are. You want your boss to be more understanding, your bank account to have more digits, your body to be more beautiful. the world to be more just. And this constant war against what is consuming you. From the inside. Amor Fati doesn't mean passively accepting everything like a doormat. It means stopping wasting energy, fighting against settled facts, and starting to use that energy to create solutions. I'll give you a real example. You lost your job and you're anxious. The normal approach would be, why did this have to happen to me? It's not fair. And now, what am I going to do? This is the victim mentality that generates anxiety. The Amor Fati approach would be, okay, this happened. It's a fact. Now, how can I use this situation to create something better? What opportunities does this give me that I didn't have before? How can I turn this into fuel for my growth? Nietzsche would say, don't just accept your reality, love it. Because it is exactly from what you have now, including your problems, that you will build your next version. But loving your fate is just the first step. How do you become the author of your own story? Becoming who you are. The philosophy of real self-development. Nietzsche had a phrase that has become a cliché, but which few truly understand. Become who you are. That sounds like a contradiction, right? How do you become who you already are? Anxiety exists because you are living as if you were someone else. You are playing a character that is not you, following a script you did not write, trying to please an audience that does not matter. Becoming who you are means discovering your real values, your authentic desires, your unique capabilities, and then having the courage to live according to them, even if it means disappointing some people. Let me translate this into practical situations. You are anxious at work because you are trying to be the perfect employee who never causes problems, never disagrees, always says yes. But that's not who you are. You have opinions, ideas, limitations. When you deny this, you are living a lie, and lies generate anxiety. You are anxious in relationships because you are trying to be the person you think others want you to be. But this is unsustainable. At some point, the mask falls, and then you get anxious thinking, what if they find out who I really am? Nietzsche would say, stop trying to be approved by everyone and start being respected for who you really are. Anxiety decreases dramatically when you stop pretending. But how do you discover who you really are amidst so much external noise? The hammer of truth. Destroying your illusions. Nietzsche called himself the philosopher with a hammer because he believed it was necessary to destroy illusions to reveal the truth. And your anxiety is built on a series of illusions you don't even realize you have. Illusion number 1. I need everyone's approval to be happy. Lie. You need your own approval and that of a few important people in your life. The rest is irrelevant. Illusion number 2. If I don't control everything, everything will go wrong. Another lie. You don't even control 10% of what happens in your life. Your only option is to control your reactions. Illusion number 3. My anxiety is a disease that needs to be cured. Not necessarily. Your anxiety might be a sign that you are living below your potential, that it's time to make important changes. I'll give you a practical exercise with Nietzsche's hammer. Take one of your biggest anxieties and ask yourself, why does this bother me so much? What belief about myself or the world is behind this fear? For example, you are anxious because you might not get a promotion. Hammer this anxiety. Why does this matter so much? What story am I telling myself about what this promotion means? Am I not putting my self-worth in the hands of other people? Nietzsche's hammer is painful, but liberating. When you destroy the illusions that sustain your anxiety, it simply disappears. But what if destroying these illusions reveals a void? What if behind the anxiety, there is nothing? Dancing over the abyss, transforming emptiness into freedom. Here, we reach the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy, and the point that can change your life forever. He said, if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. But what few people know is that he didn't see this as something terrible. He saw it as an opportunity. The emptiness you feel when you destroy your illusions is not the end. It's the beginning. It's the blank space where you can write your own story. Modern anxiety comes from a very specific place, from the fear of the void, the fear of not having a predefined purpose, the fear of having to create your own meaning for life. Our society sold us the idea that there should be a manual, a cosmic purpose, a clear direction. And when we realize there isn't one, we panic. Nietzsche would say, great, now you are free to create. Think of it this way. You are anxious because you don't know what the meaning of life is. But what if the meaning of life is exactly this, for you to create your own meaning? What if your anxiety is actually your impatient soul, wanting to start building something authentic. Here's a powerful exercise. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Start asking, what is this happening for? What forces are trying to be born through you? What version of you is trying to emerge? Nietzsche called this the will to power, not power over others, but power over oneself, the power to create, the power to turn obstacles into opportunities. Here, we reach the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy and the point that can change your life forever. He said, if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. But what few people know is that he didn't see this as something terrible. He saw it as an opportunity. The emptiness you feel when you destroy your illusions is not the end. It's the beginning. It's the blank space where you can write your own story. Modern anxiety comes from a very specific place, from the fear of the void, the fear of not having a predefined purpose, the fear of having to create your own meaning for life. Our society sold us the idea that there should be a manual, a cosmic purpose, a clear direction. And when we realize there isn't one, we panic. Nietzsche would say, great, now you are free to create. Think of it this way. You are anxious because you don't know what the meaning of life is. But what if the meaning of life is exactly this, for you to create your own meaning? What if your anxiety is actually your impatient soul, wanting to start building something authentic? Here's a powerful exercise. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Start asking, what is this happening for? What forces are trying to be born through you? What version of you is trying to emerge? Nietzsche called this the will to power, not power over others, but power over oneself, the power to create, the power to turn obstacles into opportunities. Inner Superman, creating your own values. Nietzsche's most famous and most misunderstood concept is the Superman, or Mensch. No, he wasn't talking about a superior being who dominates others. He was talking about you taking full control of your own narrative. Nietzsche's Superman is someone who has stopped seeking external validation for their values and has started creating them from within. It is someone who has transformed their anxiety into creative energy. I'll give you a concrete example. You are anxious because you don't know if you are on the right path in life. But who defined what the right path is? Your parents? Society? Your friends? Instagram? The inner Superman asks, what is my right path? What makes sense to Emmy? What makes me feel alive and authentic? This doesn't mean being selfish or not caring about anyone. It means stopping the outsourcing of your most important decisions to other people. Here's a practical exercise. Take a decision that is making you anxious. Now imagine you are the only person in the world and that your choices will not be judged by anyone. What would you choose? That is your internal compass speaking. Nietzsche's Superman has no anxiety about approval because he is his own judge. He has created his own criteria for success, his own values, his own definition of a good life. And you know what's interesting? When you stop desperately seeking approval, you naturally become more respected and admired. People can feel authenticity, but what about when external circumstances are really difficult? How do you maintain this mindset when everything is falling apart? The art of transvaluation, transforming poison into medicine. Nietzsche had an incredible ability to turn his greatest difficulties into his greatest strengths. He called this transvaluation, the art of completely changing the value you assign to things. He was physically ill, socially isolated, and financially broke for most of his life. But instead of playing the victim, he used all of this as fuel for his greatest philosophical discoveries. I'll teach you how to do this in practice with your anxiety. First, stop seeing anxiety as an enemy. Your anxiety is information. It's telling you that something important is at stake, that you care deeply about something. This is not a weakness, it's a misdirected strength. Second, use the energy of anxiety for action. Anxiety is concentrated energy. Instead of letting it paralyze you, channel it into solving the problem that is causing the fear. Third, see your most difficult moments as your best schools. Nietzsche said, what does not kill me makes me stronger. But this is only true if you choose to learn from the difficulty instead of just surviving it. For example, you were rejected in a relationship and are anxious about never finding someone. Transvaluation would be, this rejection freed me to find someone who truly values me. It taught me about my patterns and gave me clarity on what I really want. Transvaluation transforms every obstacle into a step, every problem into a growth opportunity, every anxiety into energy for change. But how do you maintain this perspective when the anxious mind wants to convince you otherwise? The eternal return. living as if every moment mattered now. Let's move on to one of Nietzsche's most powerful ideas for combating anxiety, the eternal return. Imagine you had to live your life exactly as it is, with all its moments, all its choices, all its pains, and joys, an infinite number of times. Would you be willing? This question is a radical test of honesty with yourself. If the answer is no, then you need to change something. If the answer is yes, then you are living an authentic life. Anxiety usually arises when we are living for the future or stuck in the past. What if this goes wrong? What if that doesn't happen? Why did I do that? Why didn't I do that? The eternal return brings you back to the only moment that truly exists, now. And more than that, it makes you value this moment as if it were eternal. I'll give you a practical exercise. When anxiety hits, ask yourself, if I had to live this anxious moment infinitely, what would I change about it? How could I transform it into something worth repeating? Maybe you realize you need to have a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe you realize you need to make a decision you've been postponing. Maybe you realize you're wasting energy worrying about things you can't control. The eternal return is not just a mental exercise, it is a tool for action. It forces you to take full responsibility for the quality of your life experience. But what if, even after applying these ideas, some fears persist? How to deal with anxieties that seem irrational, beyond good and evil. Freeing yourself from judgments. One of the biggest sources of modern anxiety is the constant judgments we make about ourselves and our experiences. Is this good or bad? Am I right or wrong? Am I enough or not enough? Nietzsche proposed something radical. What if we moved out of this binary logic? What if we stopped judging our experiences as good or bad and started seeing them simply as experiences? You are anxious because you missed an opportunity. But who said that missing opportunities is bad? Maybe this loss will direct you to something much better. Maybe it will teach you something you wouldn't have learned otherwise. You are anxious because you made a mistake. But who said that mistakes are bad? Maybe this mistake is exactly what you needed to grow, to gain humility, to discover your resilience. Going beyond good and evil doesn't mean having no ethical principles. It means stopping the self-torture with absolute judgments about experiences that are naturally ambiguous. Here's a powerful exercise. Take a situation that is making you anxious and, instead of asking, why is this bad? Ask, what can this teach me? How can this serve me? What strength can be born from this situation? When you stop wasting energy judging your experiences, you have much more energy to navigate them intelligently. But how do you apply all this? When you're in the middle of an anxiety attack, the discipline of suffering, transforming pain into wisdom. Nietzsche had a very different relationship with suffering than most people. He didn't see suffering as something to be avoided at all costs, but as a school for personal development. This doesn't mean seeking out suffering or being a masochist. It means understanding that a certain amount of discomfort, including anxiety, is inevitable in the life of anyone who is growing and developing. Anxiety, seen from this perspective, is not a bug in the system. It's a feature. It appears when you are stepping out of your comfort zone, when you are facing important challenges, when you are expanding beyond your previous limits. Think of it this way. You never get anxious about things that don't matter to you. You get anxious about work because your career matters. You get anxious about relationships because connection matters. You get anxious about money because security matters. The discipline of suffering is learning to see these anxious moments as signs that you are living a life that matters, a life where things are at stake, a life where you are challenging yourself. Here is a transformative question Nietzsche would ask. Is your anxiety paralyzing you or motivating you to act? If it's paralyzing you, you are wasting precious energy. If it's motivating you, you are using it as it should be used. The discipline is to consciously choose how you will respond to anxiety, instead of simply reacting to it. But what is the practical difference between using anxiety as motivation versus being used by it? The will to power over oneself. Mastering your internal states. Here, we arrive at the central concept that can completely transform your relationship with anxiety. The will to power. But don't confuse this with power over others. Nietzsche was talking about the most important power of all. Power over yourself. Will to power is your ability to choose your internal states regardless of external circumstances. It's the difference between being a leaf in the wind and being the tree that bends but does not break. Most people live in reactive mode. Something happens. They feel a certain way, and they act based on that feeling. Anxiety arises. They despair. Then they make desperate decisions. The will to power reverses this process. You acknowledge the anxiety, decide how you want to respond to it, then act from that conscious decision. I'll give you a practical example. You have an important presentation tomorrow and you're anxious. Reactive mode would be, I'm nervous. I won't be able to do it. I'm going to mess up. Maybe it's better to cancel. Will to power would be, I acknowledge that I am anxious. This is normal and even useful. It means I care about the outcome. I will use this energy to prepare better. I will transform this nervousness into focus. The difference is subtle but revolutionary. In the first case, anxiety controls you. In the second, you use anxiety as fuel. Nietzsche would say that you have the power to transform any internal state into creative force. But you need to exercise this power consciously, like a muscle. But how do you develop this ability in daily life, especially when anxious patterns are deeply ingrained? The great liberation, creating your own morality. One of the most liberating aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy is the idea that you can create your own standards of judgment. Most of your anxiety comes from trying to meet standards that you didn't even consciously choose. You're anxious because you're not earning enough. But who defined how much is enough? You're anxious because you're not in the ideal relationship. But who defined what is ideal for you? You're anxious because you're not producing enough. But where did this measure of productivity come from? The great liberation is realizing that you can question and redefine all these standards. You can create your own criteria for success, your own values, your own definition of a good life. This doesn't mean ignoring real responsibilities or living irresponsibly. It means distinguishing between authentic responsibilities, which come from your real values, and imposed responsibilities, which come from social pressure. I'll give you a powerful exercise. Make a list of your 3 biggest anxieties. For each one, ask yourself, according to what criteria is this really a problem? Are these criteria mine or someone else's? If I were to create my own criteria, how would I evaluate this situation? When you start living by your own consciously, chosen values, anxiety decreases dramatically. Not because the challenges disappear, but because you are no longer fighting against unrealistic or irrelevant standards. But how do you know if your values are really yours or if they have been implanted by external influences? The isolation test, discovering your authentic voice. Nietzsche spent a lot of time alone, and that was no accident. He discovered that only in silence, away from the voices of other people, can we hear our own inner voice. One of the deep causes of modern anxiety is that we are constantly bombarded by the opinions, expectations, and judgments of other people. Social media, news, conversations, constant comparisons. As a result, we lose touch with our own desires and intuitions. The isolation test is simple. When you are completely alone, without any external influence, with no one to impress or disappoint, what do you really want? How do you really feel? What are your real worries versus your performative worries? We often discover that our anxieties are amplified by constant exposure to the neuroses of other people. You absorb the anxiety from your environment without realizing it. Here's a practical exercise. Dedicate 30 minutes a day to total silence. No phone, no music, no anything. Just you and your thoughts. It might be uncomfortable at first, but over time, you will start to distinguish between your authentic voice and the voices you have internalized. Nietzsche would say that anxiety is often our soul trying to warn us that we are living other people's lives instead of our own. Nietzsche spent a lot of time alone, and that was no accident. He discovered that only in silence, away from the voices of other people, can we hear our own inner voice. One of the deep causes of modern anxiety is that we are constantly bombarded by the opinions, expectations, and judgments of other people. Social media, news, conversations, constant comparisons. As a result, we lose touch with our own desires and intuitions. The isolation test is simple. When you are completely alone, without any external influence, with no one to impress or disappoint, what do you really want? How do you really feel? What are your real worries versus your performative worries? We often discover that our anxieties are amplified by constant exposure to the neuroses of other people. You absorb the anxiety from your environment without realizing it. Here's a practical exercise. Dedicate 30 minutes a day to total silence. No phone, no music, no anything. Just you and your thoughts. It might be uncomfortable at first, but over time, you will start to distinguish between your authentic voice and the voices you have internalized. Nietzsche would say that anxiety is often our soul trying to warn us that we are living other people's lives instead of our own. Living dangerously, the courage to be authentic. The last concept that can revolutionize your relationship with anxiety is one of Nietzsche's most famous phrases: live dangerously. But what does that mean in practice? Living dangerously doesn't mean being irresponsible or doing stupid things. It means having the courage to be authentic, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it creates conflict, even when you have no guarantees. Most of modern anxiety comes from the fear of living dangerously. We prefer the anxiety of inauthenticity to the uncertainty of authenticity. We prefer to suffer in known situations than to risk changes that could lead us to unknown places. But here's the paradox. When you finally have the courage to live according to your real values, to express your true opinions, to make your authentic choices, anxiety usually decreases. Because you stop wasting energy maintaining a facade. Living dangerously means having difficult conversations you've been avoiding, making decisions you've been postponing out of fear, expressing parts of yourself that you have been hiding, pursuing goals that really matter to you, even without guarantees. The irony is that the safe life you are trying to maintain to avoid anxiety is exactly what is generating your anxiety. With all these tools in hand, we are ready to look at modern anxiety in a completely new light. We have reached the end of a journey that began with a simple question: why are you anxious? And we discovered that the answer is much deeper and more liberating than any self-help manual could suggest. Your anxiety is not a disease to be cured. It is an alarm signal from a soul that is living below its potential. It is your authentic nature screaming against a life that was not consciously chosen. It is dammed up creative energy that is fermenting into worry instead of being channeled into transformation. Nietzsche showed us that the problem is not having anxiety. The problem is wasting it. The problem is not feeling afraid of the future. It's not using that fear as fuel to create a better future. The problem is not having doubts about your choices. It's not having enough courage to make choices that really matter. Through this journey, we have transformed anxiety from an enemy into an ally. From paralyzing resentment, we moved to liberating Amor Fati. From the desperate search for external approval, we arrived at the creation of our own values. From the fear of the existential void, we walked towards the freedom to create our own purpose. Now, I want you to stop for a moment and look at your current life. How many of your daily worries are about things that really matter to you versus things you think should matter? How many hours do you spend worrying about the judgment of people who don't even know your dreams, your fears, your history? We live in a unique time in human history. We have never had so many opportunities, so much information, so much freedom to create the life we want. But paradoxically, we have never been so anxious, so lost, so disconnected from ourselves. Why? Because we are afraid to use this freedom. We prefer the familiar anxiety of conformity to the transformative discomfort of authenticity. Nietzsche lived over 120 years ago, but he understood better than anyone the challenges you face today. He knew that becoming our best version is not a comfortable process. He knew that growing means dying to old versions of ourselves. He knew that anxiety is, often, the price of transformation. But he also knew something that can change your life. Today, you have more power over your internal experience than you imagine. You can choose to turn every obstacle into an opportunity, every fear into strength, every crisis into a rebirth. The question is not whether you will face difficult moments. You will. The question is whether you will use those moments to become stronger, wiser, more authentic, or if you will let them diminish you. Your anxiety is telling you it's time to stop living on the defensive and start living creatively. It's telling you it's time to stop reacting to life and start creating it. It's telling you that there is a version of you that has not yet been born, that is waiting for your courage to come into the world. And this version doesn't need anyone's approval to exist. It doesn't need guarantees to manifest. It doesn't need perfect conditions to flourish. It only needs one thing: your decision to stop wasting energy on unproductive worries and start investing that energy in building the life you really want. Philosophy is not a set of dead words in old books. It is a weapon for life. What we have seen today is just one of the many tools we can use to sculpt an existence with more purpose and serenity. Nietzsche left you a legacy, the possibility of becoming the author of your own story, the creator of your own values, the master of your own anxiety. But knowledge without application is just intellectual entertainment. So here is my challenge to you. Choose one of the ideas that impacted you the most in this video and apply it today, not tomorrow. Not next week today. It could be having a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. It could be making a decision you've been postponing. It could be simply 30 minutes in silence, discovering what you really want. Your anxiety will not magically disappear, but when you start using it as a compass for necessary changes, instead of treating it as an enemy, it transforms into one of your greatest allies. And remember, you are not alone on this journey. If this message resonated with you, and if you wish to continue on this journey of self-discovery and empowerment, do your part. Subscribe to the channel and join our community of thinkers. The next video may hold the key to your next great challenge, because, in the end, life is not about eliminating anxiety. It's about transforming it into fuel to become who you really are. And that process, my friends, is the most exciting adventure you can live.